Let's continue with the last part of the story, the real story about Africa. Why 300,000-year-old Moroccan fossils changed everything. History for sleep. If you haven't listened to the first and second part yet, visit my channel and check it out first. But the pattern keeps reappearing. Traces of deeply divergent lineages woven into modern African genomes. This means that Africa was never a simple, single cradle. It was more like a crowded landscape of related but distinct human groups, some closer to us, some further removed, occasionally mixing, sometimes replacing, sometimes absorbing each other. The genetic time machine was forcing scientists to abandon the comforting idea of a straight line from primitive to modern, and even the simple branching tree of separate species, evolving in neat isolation. Instead, they were seeing something messier, something more tangled, more alive. But to understand just how tangled, we need to talk about two figures who once seemed like the ultimate anchors in our story. Mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam. In the late 1980s, scientists analyzed mitochondrial DNA, a special kind of DNA passed almost exclusively from mothers to children, and found that all modern human mitochondrial lineages trace back to a woman who lived in Africa, probably between 100,000 and 200,000 years ago. They nicknamed her mitochondrial Eve. Later studies of the Y chromosome, the piece of DNA passed down from fathers to sons, revealed a similar pattern on the male side. All living Y chromosomes are descendant of man who likely lived in Africa, perhaps around 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, though estimates vary and have been revised with new data. He became known as Y chromosome Adam. The public imagination seized on these names. They sounded biblical, almost mystical. One mother of us all, one father of us all, point sources for the entire human family. But the reality is more subtle and more interesting. Mitochondrial Eve was not the only woman alive in her time. She was not the first human woman, nor the only one who left descendants. She is simply the most recent woman whose mitochondrial lineage survived in everyone alive today. Other women of her era had children. Some of their daughters' lines died out. Some ended in sons who could not pass on mitochondrial DNA. Over tens of thousands of years, lineages narrowed, branched, and disappeared, leaving hers as the last unbroken thread on the maternal side. The same is true for Y chromosome Adam. He was not the first man, not the only man, not even necessarily the most important man of his generation. He is just the most recent individual from whom every living man inherited his Y chromosome. Even more intriguing, mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam did not live at the same time. Their lives were separated perhaps by tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years. They were not a couple. They never met. They belonged to different chapters of our story. If you picture our ancestry as rooted in a single man and a single woman standing together on the savannah, you miss the real drama. Countless men and women, countless lineages intertwining, crossing, ending, and re-emerging, with only a few particular threads surviving on each specialized piece of DNA. And those specialized pieces do not tell the whole story of our ancestry. Mitochondrial Eve represents just one tiny ring of DNA in each cell. Y chromosome Adam represents just one chromosome out of 23. The rest of your genome, your autosomes, carry far richer, more complicated histories. On those chromosomes, different segments trace back to different ancestors who lived at different times in different places, belonging to different populations. Some of your genes may have originated in a small band sheltering in a green pocket of Africa during a dry phase. Others might trace back to Neanderthals stalking mammoths in Ice Age Europe. Others could descend from Denisovans navigating island chains in Southeast Asia, or from ghost populations in Central or Western Africa we have not yet recognized in bone. When geneticists look at this full picture, one pattern stands out clearly. Africa contains more genetic diversity than the rest of the world combined. This does not merely mean more variation. It means that many African populations carry lineages that are older, deeper, and more divergent than those found outside Africa. When you compare the genomes of two people from distant African groups, say one from West Africa and one from Southern Africa, you often find they are more genetically different from each other than either is from someone in Europe or East Asia. This is exactly what you would expect if Africa has been home to large, subdivided, interacting human populations for a very long time. Different groups partially isolated by distance, climate, rivers, forests, deserts, but still occasionally exchanging migrants and genes. A continent full of overlapping experiments in survival, all running at once. Sometimes merging, sometimes splitting, sometimes disappearing. When a small subset of these African populations left the continent roughly 60,000 years ago, they carry with them only a fraction of that deep diversity. It is like taking a few branches from an enormous tree and planting them elsewhere. Those branches will grow, change, and diverge, but much of the original complexity stays rooted where it began. So what does all of this leave us with? Ancient DNA, modern genetics, Neanderthal and Denisovan legacies, ghost populations in Africa, mitochondrial Eve, Y chromosome Adam, and the vast diversity still present across the African continent. They all point in the same direction. The old picture of human evolution as a simple branching tree, with one clean trunk rising in Africa and splitting into neat species that never meet again, no longer works. The emerging picture looks more like a braided stream. Imagine a wide river flowing through a shifting landscape. Sometimes the water splits into multiple channels running far apart for a while. One branch might wander into rocky ground. Another might wind through a fertile floodplain. A third might shrink and disappear. Then, downstream, two branches might rejoin, mixing their waters again. Sediments from one branch get carried into another. Colors blend. Patterns shift. That is what our ancestry looks like. Multiple human populations inside Africa and beyond, splitting, drifting apart genetically, adapting to local conditions, then occasionally coming back together, exchanging genes, technologies, and ideas. Neanderthals, Denisovans, ghost lineages, early Homo sapiens, all part of a single braided flow of humanity over hundreds of thousands of years. There was never just one cradle, one moment, one place where humans appeared fully formed and then marched outward, untouched and unchanged. Instead, there were many cradles, many crossings, many returns. And the proof of that is not just in the ground, not just in the tools and fossils we dig up. It is in you. Every cell in your body is a quiet archive of this braided history. Every gene you carry survived countless bottlenecks, migrations, and encounters. When you think about Africa now, you can picture not a single arrow on a map, but shimmering network of rivers, separating and rejoining, carrying the sediments of our past into the present moment. But this braided river was not just genetic. It was cultural, technological, social. And as we follow it forward toward the present, another question emerges. If our origins are so entangled, so messy, so shared, then what does that mean for how we define us in them? To answer that, we have to step back from DNA and fossils and look at the new synthesis that is coming together, a vision of humanity that is bigger, stranger, and more interconnected than anything science has ever offered before. So where does all of this finally leave us? For more than a century, scientists tried to tell our origin story as a straight line. First there was some primitive ape thing, then a slightly smarter ape thing, then finally us, or in the more modern version, there was Africa, our single birthplace, our Garden of Eden. We evolved there, became modern, and then marched out in a grand way that replaced everything else. It was a tidy story, comforting, simple enough to fit on a textbook diagram or a documentary graphic. But reality, as the fossils and the genes and the stone tools keep whispering to us, is messier, stranger, and in many ways far more beautiful. We are not looking at a single trunk with neat branches anymore. We are looking at a thicket, a tangled forest of lineages, diverging, reconnecting, overlapping in space and time. Evolution, in our case, was not a clean split followed by total separation. It was reticulate evolution, a net, not a ladder. Imagine Africa and Eurasia over the last million years as a slowly breathing organism. Populations butt off, drift apart, adapt to local conditions. And then when climates shift and ranges expand, they meet again. They exchange genes. They swap ideas, tools, and maybe even myths about ancient disasters and wandering ancestors. Then they separate again, change just enough that the next reunion will be different, too. The old Out of Africa story was about movement in one direction, out. A single origin, a single expansion, a single decisive moment when we appeared and everyone else faded away. The new picture is more like waves lapping back and forth on a shoreline. Early humans leaving Africa and then retreating long before 60,000 years ago. Others leaving later and staying. Neanderthals evolving in Eurasia and then sending some of their genes back into us. Denisovans spreading across Asia, interbreeding with our ancestors in multiple pulses. A long, slow dance of separation and reunion. This is the new synthesis. Not a total rejection about Africa, but a reframing. A recognition that our story includes multiple outs, multiple returns, and long periods where there is no clean boundary between us and them. Which brings us to an uncomfortable question. Were Neanderthals, Denisovans, and early Homo sapiens really separate species at all? In textbooks, you've probably seen them written like this. Homo sapiens, Homo neanderthalensis, and Denisovans sometimes get labeled as Homo sp or simply archaic humans. Separate names, separate categories, separate boxes. But biology does not always respect the boxes we draw. One of the classic definitions of a species is simple. If two populations can interbreed and have fertile offspring, they are usually considered the same species. By that standard, horses and donkeys are different species because their offspring, mules, are typically sterile. Chimpanzees and humans are different species because, as far as we know, we cannot produce hybrid children. Yet Neanderthals and modern humans not only interbred, they did so repeatedly over tens of thousands of years. The same is true with Denisovans. Their DNA is not a faint trace from one accidental encounter. It is a tapestry of multiple events in different times and places. Enough mixing that their genes affect how some of us respond to high altitude, to certain viruses, even to how our immune systems behave. So what we call them? Perhaps they were subspecies, regional variant of a broader human lineage that had only partly diverged. Maybe they were species in a loose sense, distinct enough anatomically and genetically that we can tell their bones apart, but still part of a shared reproductive pool when circumstances allowed. The truth is, the species concept itself begins to fray at the edges when we apply it to our own past. Nature did not label these populations for us. It simply let them adapt, meet, and mingle when conditions brought them together. From their point of view, there was no neat taxonomy. They were just other people, strange looking perhaps, speaking differently, thinking differently, carrying different traditions, but still recognizably human. And if that is true, then our definition of human has to stretch. It has to include big-browed Neanderthals burying their dead with care, Denisovans passing on genes that help modern Tibetans breathe on the roof of the world, early Homo sapiens in Africa carving patterns into ochre, wearing beads made from shells, and leaving handprints on cave walls. For a very long time, scientists spoke about behavioral modernity as if it were a switch. One moment, our ancestors were essentially clever apes. Then, around 50,000 years ago, the story went, a creative explosion happened. Art, symbolism, long-distance trade, complex tools, all supposedly appearing almost overnight, mostly in Europe, mostly with fully modern Homo sapiens. That story is fading. The more archaeologists dig, especially in Africa, the more they find that the light of symbolic behavior does not switch on suddenly. It flickers. It glows in different places at different times. It smolders, goes dim, then flares up again. In southern Africa, at a site called Blombo's Cave, people were engraving abstract patterns on pieces of red ochre more than 70,000 years ago. Nearby, at other sites, they were making shell beads, mixing pigments, and maybe even organizing living spaces according to social rules we can only guess at. Far to the north, Neanderthals were collecting rare minerals and bird feathers that seemed to have had no practical purpose, only symbolic or decorative ones. In Iberia, there are caves with painted motifs that may predate the arrival of modern humans, suggesting that Neanderthals, too, were mark makers on stone. Symbolic behavior, then, was not the private property of a single species or a single moment. It seeped into different populations at different tempos, shaped by local conditions, group histories, and the slow accumulation of cultural tradition. Instead of a big bang of human consciousness, We see a long dawn, a gradual brightening across continents and millennia. And through all of this, climate was a silent conductor. The ice sheets advanced and retreated. Rain belts shifted north and south, turning forests into deserts and deserts into grasslands. Sea levels rose and fell, opening and closing migration routes. A valley that was a rich refuge in one generation could be a desolate wasteland in the next. Every time the environment changed, populations moved. Some were squeezed into refuges where small groups were forced to innovate or die. Others followed animals into new regions, encountering unfamiliar landscapes and unfamiliar people. Climate did not just shape where we lived. It shaped how often those separate branches of humanity bumped into each other. In wet periods, forests expanded, blocking some routes but opening others. In dry, cold pulses, open grasslands might link areas that had once been isolated, bringing Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens into contact. Each encounter was an opportunity for conflict, for cooperation, for trade, for romance, for language learning and technology borrowing, and sometimes for gene flow. You can think of climate change as a hand that kept stirring the human pot, keeping the ingredients from settling into neat, separate layers. And something else emerges from this new picture. Culture often moves faster than genes. Consider stone tools. In some regions, archaeologists find similar tool types spread over vast distances, even where the genetics suggest limited interbreeding. That means ideas were traveling, even when people were not mixing much biologically. A flint knapping technique perfected in one valley could be copied and modified hundreds of miles away within just a few generations, carried by trade, marriage alliances, visiting hunters, or captured rivals. A pigment recipe, a way of hafting a spear, a method for sewing clothing or building a shelter. These could leap from one population to another like sparks on a windy night. Cultural evolution, in this sense, became the real accelerator. Genes changed slowly, constrained by reproduction and the long arc of natural selection. But ideas could move from mind to mind almost instantly. Compared to evolutionary time, they could accumulate, recombine, and sometimes outlive the very populations that first created them. This is why the archaeological record can show sudden appearances of certain technologies far from their original hearths. It is not always that a new people swept in and replaced the locals. Often, it is simply that a new way of thinking arrived. In this mosaic, Southern Africa takes on a special importance. For years, East Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania held the spotlight. The Rift Valley, with its famous fossils, became the default setting for human origins in the public imagination. Lucy lived there. Early Homo erectus walked there. So it was tempting to see it as a singular cradle. But Southern Africa has been quietly rewriting that script. Caves like Blombo, Sabudu, and Clayse's river mouth hold layers upon layers of early Homo sapiens activity. Here we see some of the earliest evidence for complex adhesives, for heat-treated stone, for carefully planned hunting strategies. We see people using fire not just to stay warm, but to pre-process stone to make better tools. We see structure hearths, sleeping areas, and specialized activity zones that hint at social organization and planning. We also see those early stabs at symbolism, engraved ochres, personal ornaments, perhaps the beginnings of shared visual traditions. All of this, tens of thousands of years before similar behaviors are documented in Europe. Does that mean humanity really began in Southern Africa rather than East Africa? Not exactly. It means that the cradle was never a single place at all. East Africa, North Africa, Southern Africa, multiple regions were hosting populations that looked and behaved recognizably human, often at overlapping times. Each region contributed threads to the final tapestry. Southern Africa, with its rich and continuous archaeological record, simply gives us one of the clearest windows into that process. A reminder that our species was not born in a single valley, but in a continent-wide experiment in being human. And yet, for all we have learned, the unknowns still loom larger than the knowns. We do not know exactly how many distinct human lineages were wandering the earth 200,000, 400,000, or 800,000 years ago. Every few years, a new fossil or a strange genetic signal suggests the existence of a ghost population, a group that contributed to our DNA, but left no clear trace in the bones we have found so far. We do not know precisely when language, real, full, complex language, blossomed. We can infer, we can estimate, but we cannot yet point to a specific ancestor and say, this is the first person who told a story. We do not know how many times populations almost vanished, as they did during that brutal bottleneck around 900,000 years ago. The genetic record shows echoes of crises, but not all of them, and not in high resolution. There may have been other narrow escapes, other episodes when our lineage teetered on the edge. And we do not know exactly why our particular branch survived while others, like the Neanderthals and Denisovans, eventually disappeared as distinct groups. Was it numbers? Social networks? Tiny advantages in communication, cooperation, or child-rearing? Or sheer chance? All of this demands a certain humility. When we reconstruct deep history, we are working with fragments, bits of bone here, a scrap of DNA there, a scattering of stone tools on an ancient riverbank. The gaps between them are vast, and the temptation to fill those gaps with neat stories is strong. The new synthesis warns us to be careful, to treat our diagrams and timelines as hypotheses, not finished truths, to expect the picture to change again and again as new data emerges from caves, deserts, and ancient genomes. But this shifting, complex, tangled story does not diminish us. If anything, it makes our origin more remarkable. We are not the inevitable pinnacle of a straight line. We are the contingent outcome of countless crossings and recrossings, the heirs of Neanderthal hunters, Denisovan Highlanders, African innovators, and uncounted other cousins whose names we will never know, but whose genes and ideas live on in us. We are the species that emerged from a long, precarious balancing act between extinction and survival, chaos and cooperation. A species shaped by droughts and ice, by narrow refuges and wide migrations, by old alliances and new encounters. To rethink what it means to be human in light of this new synthesis is to accept that we have always been plural, that our identity was forged not in isolation, but in contact, in shared hardships, in exchanged knowledge, in the quiet merging of lineages that had once been apart. And as you lie here listening, drifting towards sleep, you are carrying all of that inside you, the fused chromosome from a distant bottleneck, the Neanderthal genes that fine-tune aspects of your biology, the Denisovan echoes in your immune system or your response to altitude, if your ancestry links you to those ancient encounters. The symbolic traditions first sketched in ochre on cave walls and in beads worn around long-forgotten necks. The new story of human origins is not a straight path out of one place. It is a web, a network, a slow, shimmering braid of genes and cultures, climates and choices, and it is still being woven. Now zoom forward from that small group, leaving Africa 60,000 years ago, all the way to us, to laboratories humming late at night, to archaeologists brushing dust from a fragment of bone, to computers quietly grinding through billions of genetic letters. Our story did not end when those first humans stepped into Arabia. In some ways, it is only just beginning, because for the first time in the entire history of our species, the tool we are evolving fastest is not our bodies, it is our science. Right now, human origins research is in the middle of its own bottleneck and expansion. For most of the 20th century, evidence trickled in slowly. A skull here, a jaw there, a few stone tools. Interpretations were funneled through a narrow set of methods and a few dominant theories. Out of Africa, Garden of Eden, one clean exit, one neat story. But in the last few decades, the constraints have snapped, like a river bursting out of a narrow channel. New technologies are sending evidence in every direction at once. Old questions are being rewritten. New questions are appearing faster than anyone can answer them. And the future of human origins research is going to be stranger, richer, and more surprising than anything we have imagined so far. Let's briefly consider the tools that are about to change everything. For most of the time we've been studying human evolution, we relied on bones and stones, hard things that fossilize. Skulls, teeth, femurs, hand axes, scrapers, blades. If it did not turn to rock, it was invisible. That meant our view of the past was like watching a movie through a keyhole. But a new wave of techniques is slowly widening that keyhole. One of the most powerful is called proteomics. DNA breaks down over time. In warm climates, it often disappears entirely after a few tens of thousands of years. But proteins, Proteins can last much, much longer. They are tougher, more durable. They cling to ancient bones and teeth like faint fingerprints of long-dead bodies. Proteomics is the science of reading those fingerprints. By sequencing the proteins preserved in old fossils, researchers can reconstruct parts of the original genome. Even when DNA is long gone, that means we may soon be able to place mysterious fossils more accurately on the human family tree. Was that strange jawbone from China really a Denisovan? Was that fragment from North Africa a close cousin of modern humans, or a distant branch entirely? Proteins might be the way we finally find out. Alongside proteomics, dating methods are undergoing their own quiet revolution. For decades, radiocarbon dating was the undisputed king, but it only works reliably back about 50,000 years. The deeper past, the time of early Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and their ancestors, had to be dated using cruder tools, layers of volcanic ash, changes in Earth's magnetic field, associations with animal fossils. Now, improved uranium series dating, argon methods, and techniques that measure trapped electrons in tiny mineral grains are giving us much sharper timelines. Scientists can date individual teeth, single grains of quartz, even cave formations that grew slowly over hundreds of thousands of years. The blurry outlines of the past are coming into focus. Sometimes that means pushing fossils much older than we thought. Sometimes it means discovering that two species we believed lived side by side were actually separated by tens of thousands of years. And then there is environmental DNA. This might be the strangest of all. When you walk through a forest, sit in a cave, or drink from a river, you leave tiny traces of yourself behind. Skin cells, hair fragments, microscopic bits of bodily fluids. Over time, most of this breaks down. But under the right conditions, in cave sediments, lake mud, frozen soils, fragments of DNA can linger, not from a skeleton, not from a fossil, just from the mere presence of living bodies that were once there. Environmental DNA, or EDNA, is the art of reading those silent traces. Researchers can scoop up a handful of sediment from the floor of a cave, dissolve it, filter it, sequence it, and sometimes find genetic echoes of humans and animals that never left a single bone behind. Already, this technique has revealed Denisovan DNA in caves where no Denisovan fossils have been found. In the future, we may be able to map where different human groups lived, how they overlapped, and when they disappeared, all from dirt and dust. Put these technologies together, and you get something extraordinary. A future where the past is no longer limited to what survives as rock-hard bone in just the right conditions. A future where every cave, every riverbed, every dusty sediment core might be hiding faint genetic whispers of forgotten people. But here is the strange thing. Even though our methods are getting more sophisticated, large parts of the map are still blank. So far, most of what we know about early humans comes from a few well-studied regions: South and East Africa, part of Europe, bits of Western Asia, a handful of sites in Siberia and China. But look at a globe in your mind. Think of Central Africa, the vast rainforests of the Congo Basin, the savannas and highlands stretching across the middle of the continent. For most of human history, those places were not empty, yet they are almost entirely absent from the fossil record. Dense forests, acidic soils, relentless humidity, none of that is kind to bone. The same is true for large parts of Arabia. For decades, it was imagined mostly as a desert, a barrier between Africa and the rest of Eurasia. But new research suggests that during some wet periods, Arabia was dotted with lakes, grasslands, and rivers, a green gateway, a place where human populations could have passed through, settled, flourished, and vanished again, leaving very little behind. Then there is Southeast Asia, a maze of islands and drowned continental shelves. During ice ages, sea levels dropped and land connections appeared, creating huge expanses of habitable territory that are now underwater. Those lost landscapes could hold crucial clues. Early Homo sapiens, Denisovans, and perhaps entirely unknown human species who shared this tropical world. These regions, Central Africa, Arabia, Southeast Asia, are likely to be the frontiers of human origins research in the coming decades. If proteomics, improved dating, and environmental DNA are the new tools, these are the new treasure maps. But there is a problem. The climate that once shaped our ancestors is changing again, faster than at almost any point in our species' history. Rising temperatures are melting permafrost, thawing glaciers, drying lakes, and rearranging coastlines. On one hand, this might expose new sights. Caves emerging from retreating ice, riverbanks eroding to reveal buried bones. On the other hand, it is also destroying evidence. As permafrost melts, organic materials break down faster. Coastal archaeological sites, some of them the only remaining traces of early seafaring peoples, are being swallowed by rising seas and violent storms. Caves once stable for tens of thousands of years are seeing shifts in temperature and humidity that can damage paintings, bones, and sediments. Human origins research is in a race against time. We are trying to read our deepest history, just as the pages are starting to crumble. Future archaeologists will have to work not just as excavators, but as emergency responders, triaging which sites can be saved, documenting fragile evidence before it disappears forever. The way we do that work is changing, too. For most of its history, paleoanthropology was dominated by a few institutions, a few countries, and often a few loud voices. Data moved slowly. Fossils were locked away, seen by only a handful of experts. Field notes and photographs sat in drawers, unpublished for decades. That world is fading now. High-resolution scans of fossils can be shared globally. Genetic data on ancient humans is uploaded to public databases where hundreds of teams can analyze it from different angles. Young researchers from countries that hold key fossils are leading their own excavations and interpretations rather than shipping their heritage abroad. Collaboration and data sharing are reshaping the field. A researcher in South Africa can work with a lab in Japan for proteomic analysis, a team in Germany for dating, and a group in the United States for genetic modeling, all on the same specimen. Disagreements still happen. Interpretations still clash. But the conversation is wider, louder, and more democratic than ever before. And that brings us to the heart of the matter. Because as the science changes, so do the stories we tell about ourselves. The old out of Africa model was simple, comforting in a way. One origin, one exodus, one chosen lineage. You could imagine a single moment when we appeared, fully formed, and everything before that was them. The emerging picture is far more complicated. Multiple populations within Africa, interacting, separating, and reconnecting over hundreds of thousands of years. Early excursions out of Africa, long before 60,000 years ago. Episodes of interbreeding with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and perhaps other still unnamed relatives. A web, not a straight line. What does that mean for human identity? It means there is no single birthplace where you can stand and say, here is where humans began. No single skull that contains a single spark of us. Instead, humanity looks more like a braided river. Channels separating, rejoining, merging, splitting again. No one channel is the real one. All of them together make the river. For some people, this complexity can feel unsettling. It blurs the boundaries between us and them, between modern humans and our extinct cousins. If Neanderthals buried their dead and cared for their injured, if Denisovans pass as genes that help Tibetans breathe at high altitudes, if multiple African populations contributed to the ancestry of every person alive today, then the line between human and almost human becomes harder to draw. But that blurring may be the most beautiful part of all. It means that being human is not about a single place, a single moment, or a single pure lineage. It is about connection, mixture, and survival through sharing, not isolation. Of course, not everyone agrees on exactly how this all worked. Right now, some researchers support a model sometimes called African multiregionalism, where different populations within Africa contributed to the modern human gene pool over long periods without a single origin point. Others still argue for a more classic scenario, a core population, or perhaps a few key refuges, from which the main wave of modern humans arose, with only limited contributions from other groups. There are debates over timing. When exactly did modern traits appear? Overclassification. Which fossils count as early Homo sapiens, and which are something else? Over-interbreeding. How much Neanderthal or Denisovan ancestry do we really carry? And what did it do? These disagreements are not signs of a field in crisis. They are signs of a field that is fully alive. Every new fossil, every new genome, every new dating result nudges the arguments one way or another. In 10 years, some of today's confident models will probably look naive. In 20, we may be telling a version of our story that nobody has quite imagined yet. Through all of this, one thing remains steady. Africa is still the center of gravity. Not the simple, single cradle once imagined, but the vast, dynamic engine of our evolution. However tangled the branches of our family tree become, they still root in African soil. The earliest known Homo sapiens fossils. The greatest depth of genetic diversity. The long, complex dance of populations that eventually gave rise to every person alive. To say that our story is out of Africa is still broadly true. We just now understand that out of does not mean leaving a walled garden. It means emerging from a continent-sized laboratory of evolution, where climate, geography, and time shaped dozens of populations into something that could spread across the world and still remain one species. And this, perhaps, is the most astonishing thing to carry with you as you drift towards sleep. You are the endpoint, for now, of an experiment that has been running for more than 1 million years. Your DNA holds traces of deserts long vanished, forests long turned to dust, and people whose names we will never know. Neanderthal hunters in Ice Age valleys. Denisovan families on misty mountain plateaus. Small bands of African survivors huddled at water holes during endless droughts. Generations upon generations who loved, grieved, hoped, and told stories by firelight. All of them pouring slowly, invisibly, into you. The future of human origins research will uncover more of them. More faces, more voices, more unexpected twists in a story that refuses to stay simple. We will find new species. We will redraw timelines. We will argue, revise, and argue again. But beneath all the complexity lies a quiet, humbling truth. There has never been a purer, isolated us. From the very beginning, our survival has depended on mixing, sharing, and connecting. Our origins are tangled because our lives have always been entangled with each other, with other humans, and with the changing earth itself. As new technologies open windows into deeper time and distant places, as forgotten ancestors step slowly out of the dark and into the circle of our awareness, one thing becomes ever clearer. To be human is to belong to a story that is far older, far wider, and far stranger than any of us were taught. A story written in bones and stones, in ancient proteins and environmental DNA, and the quiet, beating hearts of billions of living descendants, including yours. So here we are at the edge of the map. We started with a simple story. One birthplace, one clean migration, a neat arrow on a textbook diagram. And somewhere along the way, that tidy picture dissolved into something far stranger and far more beautiful. Instead of a single cradle, we found a continent full of them. Instead of one path out of Africa, we found many paths. Some looping back, some vanishing, some leaving only a faint whisper in our DNA. Instead of a straight line from primitive to modern, we found branching rivers, side channels, cul-de-sacs, and unexpected crossings in the dark. If that feels messy, it is because real history is messy. But it is also why science is so powerful. Science is the one storytelling system that humans have ever invented that is willing to rewrite its own script. The out-of-Africa model was never a lie. It was simply the best map we had, given the fossils and tools and genetic data available at the time. As new evidence appeared, skulls in unexpected places, stone tools older than they were supposed to be, DNA carrying the signatures of forgotten cousins, scientists did not double down on the old story. They revised it. They argued, remeasured, redated, and sometimes quietly admitted that a cherished idea had to bend or break. That is the quiet humility of science. Not that it never makes mistakes, but that it keeps trying to correct them. And yet, through all the revisions, some things have not changed. Africa still sits at the heart of the human story. Not as a tiny Garden of Eden where everything began in a single spark, but as a vast, shifting stage where wave after wave of human and pre-human populations rose, mingled, vanished, and re-emerged. The deepest roots of our species are African. The oldest branches of our family tree are African. The genetic signatures that define modern humans were refined again and again on African ground. No matter how many early excursions may have left Africa and returned, No matter how many mysterious cousins we discover in distant caves, the center of gravity remains the same. Our primary homeland is that enormous, varied continent where savannas, forests, deserts, and coastlines shape minds like ours. And here's the part that matters most, lying there in the dark, listening. For all the complexity, the Neanderthals and Denisovans, the ancient bottlenecks, the forgotten migrations, every person alive today is part of a single, continuous fabric. The details of your ancestry may be different from the person next to you. You may carry Neanderthal variants that help your immune system, or Denisovan genes that once helped someone survive at high altitudes. Your family stories may trace through cities, islands, mountains, or deserts. But beneath all of that, you share the same deep history. You carry the chromosome fusion that united those ancient survivors. You carry the echoes of that tiny population that refused to disappear during that long, brutal crisis. You carry threads from Africa, from expanding frontiers, from quiet valleys where someone long ago cared enough to teach a child how to shape a stone, or tend a fire, or tell a story. Every language you hear, every face you see, is a variation on that same improbable success. If you would like to leave a small mark on this story tonight, you can. If this journey has kept you company as you drifted towards sleep, you might tap the like button. It helps other curious night owls find their way here. You might tell us in the comments where you're listening from, what corner of this planet the descendants of those ancient travelers have carried you to. If you want to stay with us as we explore more strange turns in the human past, you can subscribe, so the next story will be waiting for you whenever you need it. And if you feel like going one step further, you might join our channel membership here on YouTube. It is completely optional, but it is one way to support this kind of long, careful storytelling, so we can keep digging through the evidence and keep turning it into gentle histories you can fall asleep to. There are many more journeys ahead. Lost civilizations, vanished species, forgotten technologies, and ideas that change the world in ways no one at the time could have understood. Whenever you are ready, you can come back, press play, and we will pick up another thread together. For now, just remember this. You are not separate from this story. You are its latest chapter. Inside your cells, in the quiet spirals of your DNA, is a record of deserts crossed, oceans sailed, winter survived, and friendships forged around ancient campfires. You are the outcome of experiments in cooperation and intelligence that began nearly 1 million years ago. As you close your eyes, you are carrying all of that with you, the whole tangled, intertwined history of our species, still unfolding, still unfinished, still being written. And for a little while longer, still wide awake in you. Enjoyed the sleep story? Subscribe for more relaxing history and bedtime tales. Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me what you'd like to listen to in the next video. Good night, sweet dreams.